Welcome to the Skeptic Zone, the podcast from Australia for science and reason.
Yes, it's the Skeptic Zone podcast, episode number 809 for the 7th of April 2024. Richard Saunders coming to you from the soggy Skeptic Zone studios. Well, the Skeptic Zone studios escaped, but there's been flooding around the studio area, including the Skeptic Zone garage, where some of my things from 50 years ago floated away. Well, they got soggy and had to be thrown out. Very sad. They're just things, they can be replaced. Well, can they? There's some very personal items I've lost. But nothing compared to a lot of people in the Sydney area who have had to evacuate their homes in the last 24 hours. A bucketing, a downpour. My mother used to say a cloudburst. It was incredible. All-night torrential rain. And if you know anybody in Sydney, or you are in Sydney, or up the coast even, you'll know what I mean. So despite the flooding rains, what's coming up on this week's episode of The Skeptic Zone? We review a documentary from 14 years ago, because it's worth reviewing, called My Mum Talks to Aliens. And this is the story of Mary Rodwell, who, at the time of the documentary being made in 2010, was running a help group for people who think they have been abducted by UFOs. And the whole premise of the documentary was, can she convince her son, who is somewhat skeptical? And you'll discover in this review coming up at the top of the show that I, for one, was not very impressed with the documentary as such, let alone the claims made within the documentary. My Mum Talks to Aliens coming up at the top of the show, with a link to the documentary itself, so you can have a large drink and view that for yourself. Following that, it's the Beatles. It's the myth about is Paul dead, in the Book of Tim. And Tim will be reading a piece written by our good friend Dr. Paul Willis, the paleontologist and noted skeptic. In fact, he was Skeptic of the Year some years ago. A good man and a good article. Following that, I review some of the archival material on Milbourne Christopher, or Milbourne. I'm not sure how he pronounced his own name, but it's either Milbourne or Milbourne. And he was a magician and one of the leading lights of early skepticism. An interesting series of reviews as discovered in Australian newspapers. Then to round off the show, it's back to the Trove archives with a special guest trover. Trover? Sounds like drover. A guest Trove reader. To find out more with Kat McLeod, all the way from Edmonton, and she will be telling us about references to the vaccine hesitancy in some quarters of the 1950s when it came to polio. And you think that vaccination hesitancy or rumours or innuendo or outright lies are something new? Find out more with Kat McLeod, all the way from Edmonton, doing the Trove segment this week. Well, that's enough for me at the moment. It's time for me to run downstairs, keep going into the garage, keep mopping up. And I've got one of those very large sort of squidgy brooms to help scrape water and muck. And delightful thought. While I do that and work up a sweat, I hope you enjoy this episode of The Skeptic Zone. Now, you may remember on last week's show I mentioned the documentary My Mum Talks to Aliens, broadcast here in Australia in the year 2010, although I don't have at hand the broadcast date. I guess it's not so important. But anyway, it was in the vicinity of 14 years ago. Now, this documentary was more of a human interest story, I guess, not really a serious look into the discovery of aliens. The story revolves around Mary Rodwell and her son Chris. Mary Rodwell was running an alien abductees support and help group. In other words, people would come to her with their stories of being kidnapped by UFOs to get a sympathetic hearing. And what is quite apparent by watching this documentary and other things that Mary Rodwell has been doing over the years is that we can be, very sure that Mary herself is a firm believer that aliens are coming to visit Earth and kidnapping people from time to time. The premise of the documentary was that Mary was given 2 weeks, some arbitrary time frame, to convince her son, Chris, who at the time was a vet, that it's all real, that the aliens are here and people are being abducted. Chris being of a skeptical mindset.
Chris and Mary Rodwell are mother and son. Their relationship is at a critical stage as a result of a deeply held belief that has torn the family apart and changed their lives forever.
Mum started getting involved in some interesting stuff about 20 years ago. And how old would I have been? We've had a family separation. My dad really wasn't into it at all. I don't like to think of Mum as a crackpot. It'd be really good if she could prove to me that she wasn't.
Well, it's cost me certainly my marriage, and I think that it's changed every belief I've ever had.
Interesting claims in the documentary include that Mary debated at some stage the president of the Skeptic Society and beat him. I'm not sure who that is referring to. It's also obvious that Mary really does think she is helping people. And indeed, we meet some of the people who come to Mary for help, relaying their stories of what happened to them from childhood or some other time.
I've also gone through a process that my clients have gone through, because when they finally start to believe maybe they're not crazy and maybe this is real, and if that's the case, everything they've ever believed in has to be reappraised.
It was about 1967. I'm 7 years old, 6.5, 7 years old, something like that. It's about 5:30 or something, 6 o'clock. And to the south of us, there was this, what looked like a ball about this big in the sky. Kind of reddish colour, you know. And as I'm looking at it, I said to my dad was there, and I said, "Hey Dad, what's that?" And he goes, "I don't know." He says, "Maybe the Air Force have something like this." Well, as it, like, hey, well, it was really bright. And what it does, it comes over the top of you, and it literally lifts you up. And what was really interesting is, I didn't remember going through any doors, right? It was like you were materialised or dematerialised or something. And then, so when I'm inside there, this craft is really big, like, you know, several stories high. Like, I'm not going.
But of course, these just boil down to stories. But then there's an interesting twist as the producers bring in somebody with a lie detector, a polygraph. And a lot of the documentary is along the lines of they test people with a lie detector and use that as a basis of finding out the truth. Was this person really abducted?
And despite her reservations about their validity, Mary has arranged for Gavin Wilson, a polygraph tester for the federal police who trained with the FBI, to come and conduct a polygraph test with Greg in an attempt to give Chris the empirical evidence he craves.
What I've been asked to test you on today is about your contact with UFOs or aliens, and we want to find out whether you've definitely seen those. Okay.
Bit of science, Mum. You've got a bit of a bugbear around science in general. So.
No, I haven't, not in the slightest.
Greg, according to the polygraph, these things have never happened.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So they are fantasy?
Well, I don't know whether fantasy is the word that I would use.
So what am I seeing in a regression?
And it's a sad commentary on the documentary and the producers that they would think this was a legitimate way to get to the truth. Of course, polygraph tests, lie detectors have long since been debunked as a reliable source to get to the truth. We also follow Mary and Chris as they travel around Australia, as Mary gives talks to groups of believers. But then we have an interesting situation where in 2010, during the filming of this documentary, Mary travels to the Australian Academy of Science to debate Professor Charles Lineweaver, a cosmologist.
The topic for tonight's debate: should the public be told that we are being visited by aliens? And Mary is going to have her work cut out. Her opponent, Dr. Lineweaver, has been researching this topic for decades, and he's on home turf. Many in the audience are his students.
When you have somebody who says, a child, for example, says, I saw a boogeyman. I saw something that scared me. You don't say, the boogeyman is in there, because that'll scare the child out of their wits. And I don't think it's necessarily good to tell people who have seen aliens and been abducted, say, yes, you did see that. They do exist, when you have what I would consider very flimsy evidence to support that.
And the fact that it's treated with such light-heartedness and often ridicule is half the problem. That's what I'm dealing with all the time. So this is part of the reason why you don't hear about it, and there's the elephant in the room and nobody talks about it. So let's go to the next part of the what I would say to you.
The documentary is edited to make it appear that the audience is mocking and laughing at Mary as she gives her point of view. And it's clumsy and obvious. We have Mary saying something, cut to audience members giggling and laughing. It is out of context, it doesn't make sense, and I think it is very, reflects poorly on the people who made this documentary. And I think the object of that was to get us to feel pity for Mary, or to make us think that the audience were full of sneering skeptics. Now, apart from relying on polygraph tests, lie detector tests, to make their points in the documentary, another piece of evidence shown is a video of UFOs in England. And this is touted as a major piece of evidence which baffles the skeptics and so on.
But before they get there, Mary wants to address the issue of photographic evidence.
This was taken from a bed and breakfast in England, near the crop circles by Silbury Hill.
There's 3 lights now. Oh, wow. There's another one. Oh, my God. Oh, my God. Come here.
It's just that crystal clarity there. That's what you don't normally see. It doesn't look like anything that I've seen before.
Oh! There's another. Oh my God! That's not fireworks, mate. No, I don't think it is either.
I viewed this very carefully, and I thought, what could that be? It's very interesting. It's these sadly out of focus lights in the sky appearing and disappearing. And I went to Metabunk and put in my search criteria, and I found the video and I found the explanation. And there's a copy of the video on the page, so I will link to this in the show notes. The following video, entitled Amazing Authentic UFO Footage Near Avery, captures the attention of many, in part due to its close proximity to the area of the UK famous for crop circles. It features an excited UFO witness filming out-of-focus lights in the sky that she assumes to be UFOs. The video is taken from a long distance away, and at no point are the lights properly in focus, because the witness is stood behind some flowers which the camera is more focused on. This, as well as the distances involved, is why, if they are flares, we cannot see the smoke trails. This is also the reason why the lights sometimes appear as diamond-shaped. It is a common thing for some cameras to cause out-of-focus light sources to appear diamond-shaped. And indeed, viewing the video, it's certainly unambiguous that the lights are simply out of focus, and that is very plain to see. It goes on to say that perhaps that the woman who was filming this was a foreigner, that she was unaware that she was looking directly towards a busy, well-known military training area called Salisbury Plain, where large-scale military exercises are carried out on a regular basis. Then it says at 2 minutes 23 on the video, we can hear a large engined aircraft flying overhead. It is quite possible that this is the same aircraft or one of several responsible for dropping the flares. And the page includes detailed maps of the area and the direction the video was being filmed. And it makes a very reasonable case for these lights simply being military flares. The documentary concludes when we meet Peter, a man who said he had DNA evidence from alien visitations, which gets a little bit on the weird side. Even more so when the polygraph test corroborates Peter's memories.
Peter passed the test. Great. I'm happy. So, as far as I'm concerned, what he witnessed, there has to be some merit in that.
The polygraph test has validated Peter's account of the events and reinforced his belief that the scientific community need to take this matter seriously.
So what are we to make of this documentary all these years later? Not very impressed with this documentary on many levels. I think it was unfair on Mary Rodwell herself. I think the editing was unfair, and I think the fact that they were relying on things like polygraph tests to try to get to the truth were sloppy, just unprofessional, careless, or maybe that wasn't the point, I don't know. Again, this is not a story about trying to find the truth about aliens, it's a story about a relationship between a mother and her son. So I guess everything else was of lesser importance. My Mum Talks to Aliens. I will link to that documentary in this week's show notes.
Hallo aan alle Nederlandse luisteraars. Op dit moment bent u aan het luisteren naar de Skeptic Zone, voor wetenschap en kritisch nadenken. Voor meer informatie ga naar www.skepticzone.tv.
And now, a reading from the Book of Tim. With Tim Mendham.
Hi, my name's Tim Mendham. I'm the editor of Australian Skeptics magazine, The Skeptic, and Executive Officer of Australian Skeptics Inc. And today I'm reading from The Skeptic magazine from September 2014, which is volume 34, number 3. And I'm reading an article by one of our favourites at the Skeptic Zone, Paul Willis, who has been around in the field for a long time. He wrote this article called The Pauline Conspiracy, in which he takes a look at a certain pop band conspiracy about them, and then looks at conspiracies and what that means for conspiracies further. Now, Paul says, the Mayan apocalypse was not the first apocalyptic prediction that I've lived through, although it was nice to have a change from the monotonous regularity of our impending demise at the hands of a biblical Armageddon. And the fact that this was a misreading of one particular text was of little consequence to the true believers. Prophecies and conspiracies have a tenacious hold are the minds of those bewitched by them. So I decided to have a look at conspiracy theories. What makes them so appealing, and how do they cloud our understanding? Science is redolent with conspiracy theories, both within its mainstream ranks and on its fringes. But I want to take an example far removed from science so that we can have a more objective dissection. I can think of no better example than an old favourite of mine from a youth spent slavishly devoted to listening to Beatles records. There are those out there who still think that Paul McCartney is dead. This whole story can be traced back to an article published on 17th of September 1969 in the Drake University student newspaper, The Times Delphic. This was written by Tim Harper, quoting fellow reporter and musician D'Artagnan Brown, great name, who tells of hearing about the hoax from other musicians and reading about it in some underground newspapers. Harper starts by claiming that there was a lot of speculation on campus that Paul may have been either, quote, insane, freaked out, or even dead, close quote. Harper makes the astute but widely held observation that the 1967 album Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band was a radical turning point in the Beatles' career. Possibly, it could be seen as the death and rebirth of the band, and the album cover appears to be a graveside scene, perhaps marking the occasion. He then goes on to lay out a litany of supposed clues as to the actual death or insanity or freaked outedness of Paul McCartney. The album cover features the four Beatles standing around what appears to be a grave, bedecked with a left-handed guitar, and Harper claims Paul was the only lefty in the band, although in fact Ringo is also a southpaw, though he played a right-handed drum kit. A hand over McCartney's head was, quote, a sign many believed is an ancient death symbol of either the Greeks or American Indians, which are two rather different cultures, but who's to notice? The clues mount up on the cover of Sgt. Pepper's and also on the cover of Magical Mystery Tour EPs. Now that's for those non-Americans, where the Magical Mystery Tour record was produced in two 7-inch EPs rather than in a whole LP, 12-inch LP. So there might be a different cover, but never mind. In the lyrics of the Beatles' double album, more popularly known as the White Album, Harper claims that by playing Revolution No. 9 backwards, the phrases "Turn me on, dead man" and "Cherish the dead" can be heard, which rather begs the question who on the campus of Drake University in 1969 came up with the bright idea of sitting down and listening to Beatles records backwards. Then again, it was the drug-addled 60s. There are some glaring errors in Harper's articles which ought to have alerted anyone to the quality of the research and journalism. Paul's recent wife is named as Jane Eastman, not Linda, a mistake repeated later in the article. Now, me, as an editor here, suggests that perhaps they're getting confusing between Jane Asher, which is Paul's first long-term girlfriend, and Linda Eastman, the lady he eventually married. But as Paul said, this is simply sloppy journalism and easy to identify. A real kicker for me is the claim that, quote, there just seems to be more to it, such as the phone numbers discernible when the Magical Mystery Tour cover is held up to a mirror. Say what? Come again? So, in between listening to their record collection played in reverse, some stoned hippie thought to look at an album cover in a mirror where they thought they could see a phone number and therefore Paul is insane, freaked out or dead. Probably a good thing that no one seems to have thought to phone that number. I'll have to add in here again, actually, that people did, because there's two ways. If you do if you do hold the cover up to a mirror, you get a number 2317438, which would probably, if you rang that number in that time, you got a person there who was particularly angry at being phoned up by every demented Beatles fan, probably in the middle of the night. Then again, if you didn't hold it in a mirror but just turned it upside down, you got a different phone number, 5371438, and if you rang that number, which people did, you got the different person who was equally upset at being called in the middle of the night by demented Beatles fans, and there would have been a lot of them. But anyway, back to Paul's article. In October 1969, someone named Tom called WKNR-FM, a radio station in the US, to spread the rumour on air, 2 students at the University of Michigan picked up the story and published their own Paul is Dead piece in the Michigan Daily, in which they simply made up more clues. They were astounded when many of these clues were subsequently repeated without question in newspapers across the USA. Thus the rumour and hoax rapidly grew to a global phenomenon of Beatles fans scouring lyrics and album covers in search of yet more clues. Eventually the story settled down to Paul McCartney having stormed out of a recording session on the 9th of November 1966 and having a fatal car accident. In an effort to spare the public any grief at this tragic loss, Paul was replaced in the band by a William Campbell, the supposed winner of a Paul McCartney lookalike competition. All this in spite of Paul being quoted in Life magazine in November '69, saying that, "If the conclusion you reach is that I'm dead, then you are wrong, because I'm very much alive. I'm alive and living in Scotland." And Paul says now, "I wanted to detail this saga to reveal some key points about a good conspiracy theory. Firstly, an origin in second-hand information from a reputed authority. Harper relied on information from a musician, D'Artagnan Brown. Surely he ought to be a trustworthy source of information about all things in the music world. An authoritative source is essential to breathe life into a conspiracy. Secondly, there is no end of evidence put forward in support of a conspiracy theory, but most of that evidence is impossible to test or verify. The lines of evidence are often convoluted," reading in mirrors or listening backwards, "and unconventional. Evidence that can be fact-checked is easily shown to be wrong, but that does not prevent true believers from sticking to their story. Similarly, evidence contrary to the conspiracy is usually ignored. As one review of the Paul is Dead conspiracy commented, "But the Paul is Dead story seems too big to defeat with facts, and it appears facts aren't the issue anyway." Thirdly, there is a significant impact on the status quo if the conspiracy were shown to be legit. The Beatles were the biggest and most influential band of their time, and I would contend that they continue to be so almost 5 decades later, and perhaps even 6 decades later. So swapping one of the most influential of them with an impersonator at the height of their fame would be unthinkable. Lastly, a strong conspiracy theory detracts from a more profound appreciation of the reality of the situation. Even if it were true, the Paul is Dead theory would not alter a single note or impact on the beauty and richness of the Beatles' music, which is their greatest legacy. So why would you want to cloud that appreciation with a load of irrelevant and erroneous guff? Now translate those findings to any of the numerous conspiracies surrounding science, be it anti-GMO research or mobile phones and cancer, climate change skeptics, or the musing of the tobacco lobby and the impacts of smoking, even the more orbital fringe conspiracies such as creationism, alien abductions, or extraterrestrials in ancient civilizations. If you look over these propositions, you will find similar features in the way they amass evidence in support of their case and ignore evidence against it. There are authorities to champion every cause, and the stakes are high should they ever manage to prove their contentions correct. But for me, the saddest feature of all conspiracy theories is the distraction from progressing with a legitimate understanding of the reality before us. I think there are some ready recognised features by which a conspiracy theory can be identified: the handling of evidence, convoluted and unconventional paths of logic, and cherry-picking only the facts that support the case may be an indication of the veracity of a proposition. But in the marketplace of ideas that is science, a good conspiracy lay hidden, waiting to ensnare the unwary and slow the progress of research. The truth is out there, but it can be hidden in a sea of false leads. And that's The Pauline Conspiracy by Paul Willis, published in the Skeptic magazine September 2014, which is volume 34, number 3. And you can download that whole issue of the magazine from our website, skeptics.com.au. Just go to the magazine tag and you can see every issue of the magazine, apart from the 4 most recent ones, available for you to download for free. We give away our IP, and that will give you plenty of reading for the next 5 years. Thank you.
This is James Randi, and you're listening to The Skeptic Zone.
Now, last week on the show, you might remember I came across a news article in my research and various Trove archives concerning Milbourne Christopher. And I did not know too much about Milbourne Christopher, but I was quite impressed by what I read, so I thought I would do a little bit more research. I should have known more about him, because here we are, according to Wikipedia. Milbourne Christopher, 1914 to 1984, was a prominent American illusionist, magic historian and author, president of the Society of American Magicians, an honorary vice president of the Magic Circle, and one of the founding members of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry. Christopher wrote a number of books, including a biography of Harry Houdini titled Houdini, The Untold Story, a chronicle of his own craft titled The Illustrated History of Magic, and thousands of essays relating to magic and mentalism. And under the title here called Debunking Work, Christopher regarded those individuals who claimed extrasensory perception or psychic powers to be actually using magic trickery. He wrote 3 book-length exposés regarding those he said were false seers or psychics: ESP, Seers and Psychics, Mediums, Mystics and the Occult, and Search for the Soul. In the latter book, he found no evidence for the existence of the soul. Skeptical investigator Joe Nickell, who was influenced by Christopher, recommended the books, quote, without reservation, end quote. And that's high praise indeed coming from somebody like Joe Nickell. Christopher also debunked parapsychology experiments and experimenters during his lifetime. Ironically, despite his denial of the existence of psychic or paranormal powers, and like his fellow magicians Harry Houdini and James Randi, both of whom also worked to expose false psychics and mediums, Christopher was accused by some of using paranormal powers to perform his own magic tricks and illusions. And what an interesting phenomenon that is, that some people are so convinced in the paranormal that they won't even accept it when a magician does a clever mentalism routine or similar trick. They can't accept the fact that it's just a trick. They still fall back on it must be psychic. It goes on here to say, at a meeting of the Executive Council of the Committee for Skeptical Inquiry, CSI, in Denver, Colorado in 2011, Christopher was selected for inclusion in CSI's Pantheon of Skeptics. The Pantheon of Skeptics was created by CSI to remember the legacy of deceased fellows of CSI and their contributions to the cause of scientific skepticism. And if I think about it, although it could be a false memory, it's hard to say, I seem to remember James Randi mentioning Milbourne Christopher, but again, I can't be sure. Nevertheless, he did appear in the Australian press over the years, and so let's have a look at some of those news clippings from all those years ago. In 1971, on the 18th of July in the Sydney Morning Herald, anyone can walk on red-hot coals. It's easy. From Sandra Jobson. London, Saturday. Throw out your Ouija board, stop reading your stars, and don't cross that gypsy's palm with silver. It's all nonsense. This is the advice Milbourne Christopher gives in a book published in Britain, debunking telepathy, ESP, astrology, spiritualism, and all the rest of the occult bag of tricks. And if anybody should know about this subject, it is Milbourne Christopher. He was named Magician of the Year for 1971 by the Society of American Magicians. He tours the world with his, quote, illusion show, end quote. Appears on about 80 US television shows a year, and lectures on magic to Yale, Princeton, and Harvard. In his luxury London hotel room, Mr. Christopher, a suave 57-year-old New Yorker, bamboozled me with magic and confounded me with science as he demolished, one by one, all my cherished illusions. Walking on red-hot coals? Why, it's easy, says Mr. Christopher. Anybody can do it. All you have to do is train yourself to tread first with the ball of your foot, then on your heel, and you don't feel a thing. And I'll just quickly comment here. There is more to it than that. It's more about physics and the transference of heat, nevertheless. What about water divining and dowsing? It's all in your mind, says Mr. Christopher. If you are told the divining rods will bend towards water or metals, your muscles will automatically react, guided by your subconscious mind. Magic's fun. As for ghosts, poltergeists, tilting tables, and seances, Mr. Christopher makes short shrift of them. I have investigated these phenomena in 68 countries and have not found a genuine case yet. Of course, I'd love to uncover a ghost in a haunted house. It would be sensational, but I'm afraid there are no such things. But why would a magician, of all people, want to debunk the supernatural? The reason he gives is serious. In these troubled times, too many people are relying on the supernatural and are being defrauded of their money by occult quacks. Many people, particularly bereaved women, are being tricked into paying out thousands of dollars to spiritualists who claim they have contacted their loved ones. And last year, Americans spent over $2 billion on Ouija boards and other supernatural props. But magic is different. It is purely for fun, says Mr. Christopher, who describes himself as an, quote, honest deceptionist, end quote. I'm not supernatural. I use psychology, he said. Fortune tellers use psychology too, he explained. They are on the lookout for little details about a person's clothing or appearance which will give a clue to his or her hopes and worries. And I think you can tell by hearing that how Milbourne Christopher was maybe not knowingly, but certainly in a very real sense, helping to set up the sentiment there for the modern skeptical movement. And we have another story here dating back to the 15th of August, 1971, also in the Sydney Morning Herald. Review, Peter Allen, Ghosts are on the way back. As a youngster in the country, I was raised on a diet of ghost stories. To this day, I can vividly recall some of the favourite stories of my late grandfather on my mother's side, a man who apparently feared nothing living or dead. He would best tell them sitting around a flickering open fire in the dead of winter. I remember as a boy of 9 or 10 listening with awe, fascination, and terror as his voice rose and fell in unison with the wind moaning through the eaves. In those days, I was a firm believer, a stand the years have mellowed, but I must still confess to a morbid curiosity about ghosts and the supernatural. For like souls, here are 2 excellent books on the subject. Seers, Psychics and ESP, Cassell, $6.75, is perhaps the more intriguing. It is by Milbourne Christopher, the man who wrote the incredible life story of Houdini, who in turn devoted a small fortune during his life to exposing mystics and the spiritualist frauds. Not that Beyond the Senses, Souvenir Press, $6.05, is any less entertaining or revealing. It is the joint work of Dr. Paul Tabori and Phyllis Raphael, both expert commentators on the strange world of the faith healer and the clairvoyant. Milbourne Christopher, obviously because of his association with the legendary Houdini, is a self-confessed skeptic. He says bluntly, if any area of the occult is documented scientifically, it will be a monumentous occasion. Until then, beware of ESP, extrasensory perception, seers and psychics. But he still leaves the final question. When all the frauds have been exposed, how does one regard the strange occurrences that still defy explanation? Researchers in 68 countries have helped Christopher in writing the book. Today he can lay claim to being one of the world's best illusionists. Occultism, in one form or another, has been with us since the start of civilization. Early this century, charlatan fortune-tellers, astrologers and spiritualists reaped millions of dollars from unsuspecting believers. Today they still thrive in many parts of the world. And today, according to both Christopher and Dr. Tabori, there's a revival of interest in occult. Both books look critically at independent scientific research into psychic happenings. Although Christopher, in particular, is quick to unveil many of the secrets and trickery of people like fortune-tellers and spiritualists, he shows that psychic revelations are not always what they seem to be by producing, quote, psychic wonders, end quote, without the aid of the supernatural, such as making tables rise apparently unaided from the floor. Sounds a little bit of the work of Kenny Biddle on TikTok, which we discussed last week. Christopher repeatedly falls back on the amazing Houdini to illustrate how fakirs and others achieve seemingly supernatural feats. It makes impressive reading. And going all the way back to 1957 on the 12th of December, it's not really a story as such, it's more three fantastic photographs under the heading here, For Party Nights, Black and White Magic. And it's Milbourne Christopher, I guess in the height of his magical career, doing stage magic with some lovely young assistants dressed in 1950s style. Milbourne Christopher himself is dressed as the classic Mandrake the magician. The tuxedo or the dinner jacket with the tails and the bow tie, I assume. Yes, it's hard to tell a little bit on these old photographs. There's one where a woman appears to levitate through a hoop. There's one where a woman is seemingly climbing up a rope, it seems, and another one where Christopher himself is tied up and blindfolded. And the accompanying captions here say, levitation stunt has a girl suspended in thin air. Her one-piece cocktail frock of fine white jersey has a slim black jersey underskirt which is trimmed with contrasting buttons. And the next caption reads, black and white is a magical formula for being well-dressed at parties. Traditionally correct for men's evening clothes, this combination of opposites is now emerging as a dramatic nighttime look for the women. Magician Milbourne Christopher helps to show the magical properties of black and white. Redheads, blondes and brunettes are all at their best in becoming black and white. It plays up natural colouring, doesn't upstage or overlap the wearer. And the final caption reads, escape trick is one of Christopher's most baffling. The girls tied him securely, but moments later he escaped. Roper at left is in black nylon chiffon and a brief jacket of rayon cotton brocade. Her companion wears a dress with a nylon chiffon skirt and a white cotton lace top. And the final caption here, famous rope trick performed by Christopher serves to display potential of black and white. Girl, acting as if she is defying the law of gravity, wears a dress with a buoyant skirt of cotton lace and a top of black peau de soie with a square notched neckline. So there we are, a little bit about Milbourne Christopher, and I'm very glad I stumbled across a reference to him when researching the paranormal in Trove, because he's a man I should know more about. He seems to have had a huge influence on the modern skeptical movement. I will link to his wiki page in this week's show notes. Attention all skeptics in the Carolinas. Mark your calendars for an event that's set to enlighten, engage, and entertain. The Triangle Skeptics' first ever Skeptic Camp is coming to Raleigh, North Carolina, and you won't want to miss it. Join them on the 25th of May 2024 at the John Chavis Memorial Park Community Centre for a day filled with thought-provoking talks and presentations. It'll kick off with social events the evening before and keeping the conversation going with more activities the following day. It's the perfect opportunity to dive deep into discussions and to connect with fellow skeptics and fans of science and reason in the Triangle area. The organisers expect at least one very notable guest presenter, and they want your voice too. The call for presentations is now open for speakers who can bring fresh perspectives and compelling content. Attendee registration begins on the 16th of April, so be sure to secure your spot for this inaugural event. You'll find all the details, including links to registration and the call for presentations, on the Triangle Skeptics website. Just go to tryskep.org. In a fun twist, this year's main conference coincides with Towel Day. In the spirit of the occasion, bathrobes are optional, though you'll be reminded to comply with local ordinances requiring attire of some sort. It's a nod to the lighter side of science and skepticism, reminding us all of the importance of not taking ourselves too seriously. Don't miss out on this unique blend of critical thinking, community, and celebration. Join them at the Triangle Skeptic Camp 2024. Question, discover, and learn in the heart of Raleigh. Once again, the website is tryskep.org.
It's time to strap on your virtual scuba gear and get ready to take a dive into Trove. If you've been dipping your toes into current events, you may have learned that Mr. Paul Alexander died on March 11th, 2024. Paul was a man from Texas who fell ill at the age of 6 during a major outbreak of polio in the early 1950s. Paralyzed for life, only able to move his head and neck, he was recognized by the Guinness Book of World Records as the person who spent the longest amount of time living in an iron lung. Paul was hospitalized in February 2024 for COVID-19. However, the cause of his death is unclear at the time of this recording. This man's story is what inspired me to venture into the archives of Trove to see what people thought about the polio vaccine in the 1950s. I was curious as to whether or not there would be any hesitancy towards the vaccine, like we've seen since 2020 with the COVID-19 vaccines. What I learned, dear listeners, is that the term anti-vaxxer may be new, but they are not a new phenomenon. Let's take a look at what the Australian newspapers were saying about the polio vaccine at the time of the last major worldwide outbreak. From the Barrier Minor, 14th of May, 1952. Polio vaccine warning. Melbourne. A polio vaccine, likely to be available within the next 2 years, would have to be used with extreme care in its early stages. The director of the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute, Sir McFarlane Burnett, warned last night. Forecasting the mass production of an effective polio vaccine of living tissue, Sir McFarlane Burnett said that it would be injected into young children between 1 and 2 years, probably on the buttocks, to give immunization against polio. However, he said that the death of even 1 or 2 children who developed a paralysis from the vaccine would mean a public outcry that would stop the development of a safe, effective method for a long time. Let's skip ahead a few years now. The Daily Mercury in Queensland, on the 25th of October, 1954. Vaccine warning. London, October 24th. A warning against wide use of inactivated poliomyelitis virus is given in the current issue of the British Medical Association journal, Lancet. It says this vaccine is already being made on a large scale in America. If the first trials show that it has a protective effect, there is likely to be strong pressure in America and perhaps Britain to use it widely. Quote, such pressure should be resisted, for no one will know how long any protection may last, Lancet says. Temporary protection may, in the long run, prove worse than no protection at all, and repeated inoculations that might provide consistent protection might also involve serious risk of allergic reactions to monkey kidney tissue. End quote. Lancet adds that it might not be easy to explain these objections to a public that is naturally eager for any measure that will check the spread of polio. Monkey kidney tissue being used? That sounds rather unusual and interesting. So I have to digress ever so slightly and share what I discovered about that. There was an article published in the Argus in Milbourne, Victoria on the 23rd of May, 1955, titled, Monkeys for Polio? Yes, says cleric. The church had no reason to protest against monkeys being killed to produce anti-polio vaccine, Reverend A. Crichton Barr said at Scott's Church last night. Quote, polio is a dread disease that strikes down mainly children, he said. The very word polio makes parents and doctors shudder. The life of a single monkey was painlessly taken to safeguard 1,000 to 2,000 children from the ravages of an awful disease. Those who believe that a single monkey's life is as important as the health and well-being of thousands of children will object on the grounds of cruelty, Mr. Barr said. But in Christianity, there is no basis for such weird beliefs. Every child is precious, not only to its parents, but to God. Mr. Barr said that monkeys used to produce the vaccine were flown to Australia under special temperature and air pressure conditions to keep them healthy. The monkeys were killed by administering a painless anesthetic and their kidneys removed. From this stage, all the work was done by growing the kidney tissue in a test tube along with the polio virus. Mr. Barr was answering a church member who asked why the church did not protest against the experiments carried out on monkeys in polio vaccine research. Now I'm very curious as to whether or not monkeys can live with just one kidney like humans can. But I've already digressed enough. It is nice to know that some people were concerned about the monkeys and appreciated their sacrifice. But back to the anti-vaccination campaign. A few months after warnings were published in the journal Lancet, there was another article, this time in the Central Queensland Herald, the 26th of May, 1955. Polio vaccine. Brisbane, May 25. The State Director General of Health, Dr. Freiberg, today issued a warning against the use of, quote, unapproved, end quote, Salk poliomyelitis vaccine. He said that the National Health and Medical Research Council, which met in Sydney recently, was concerned about Salk vaccine being sent from America as a gift to Australian friends. The council had warned against the use of vaccine which had not been tested. I'd like to interject that the Salk vaccine mentioned is the one created by Dr. Jonas Salk, who tested the vaccine on himself, his family, and a year later on 1.6 million children in Canada, Finland, and the United States of America. The results were announced on the 12th of April, 1955, 6 weeks prior to this article being published, and the vaccine was licensed the same day. So while the article was claiming that it was an unapproved vaccine, it had been approved and had been very well tested. I decided to skip forward a few years to see how things played out. I found an article in the Australian Jewish Times, dated the 3rd of October, 1958. Government firm on Salk vaccine. Canberra. The federal government is determined to forge ahead with its polio vaccination campaign despite certain opposition, mainly from anti-Semitic sources, arguing against it on the ground that the originator of the vaccine, Dr. J. Salk, is a Jew. In the House of Representatives last week, the Minister for Health, Dr. Donald Cameron, said the government's immunization drive would be extended to include more adults. He was answering Mr. R.W.C. Swartz, Liberal, Queensland, who asked whether the Salk vaccination campaign had produced the, quote, degree of immunity which was expected, end quote, in view of a slight increase in the incidence of poliomyelitis. Replying, Dr. Cameron said an increase had been noted, somewhere between 8 to 12 cases of polio had been recorded in Victoria, quote, in uninoculated subjects, end quote. Dr. Cameron said that in all states, the government's campaign would be stepped up to include people aged 15 to 44. So there you have it, folks. The anti-vaccine campaign is often rooted in ignorance, misinformation, fear, or even racism. I would like to note that while polio has not been completely eradicated, they are hopeful that it will be by 2026, as there are only 2 countries that are deemed endemic, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Australia was deemed to be polio-free in 1972. New Zealand was declared free of polio a decade earlier in 1962. Canada got their designation in 1979. And if you would like to look up any country's status, you can go to polioeradication.org for more information. I found so many fascinating articles about vaccine hesitancy when researching this segment. Don't forget that you too can explore the annals of Trove from anywhere in the world at any time. Simply go to trove.nla.gov.au. You never know what you may find.
Thank you for listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. And bit by bit, I'm drying out, and so is the garage. But it's very humid today because of all the leftover water. There's still lots of water in the ground, and that's the problem. If there's more torrential rain coming, there's nowhere for it to go because the ground is soaked. We'll keep an eye on that situation. I'll report next week whether we've dried out or not. Thank you to those people who enjoy the Skeptic Zone so much that they contribute via Patreon or PayPal or sometimes with a generous donation. If you go to skepticzone.tv, you can click the link and send a little bit each week or each month to the Skeptic Zone. And you can all do me a favour. You can tell people that you listen to the Skeptic Zone or recommend it or tweet it or Facebook it if you enjoy a certain segment or item. It really does help the show. And for those of you who may not know, the Skeptic Zone is in chapters or segments, but it's been designed in such a way that on your podcasting app of choice, or even in your car, if your car player is set up and you click the button, you'll get directly to the next chapter or back to the previous chapter. And don't forget, at skepticzone.tv, you can review the contents of every episode in our show notes, and it gives the time code for every segment too, so you can skip straight to the segment that interests you the most. Coming up on next week's show, a report from Skeptics in the Pub, where I talk to Tim Mendham about some of the special guests you can expect to see at the Australian Skeptics National Convention in November, and also a link to the We Can Reason conference coming up on the 4th of May in Calgary, Canada. And if you're in that neck of the woods, I can't wait to see you there. Sounds like it's going to be a wonderful convention. But for this week, mopping the floodwater and the sweat off my brow, this is Richard Saunders signing off from soggy Sydney, Australia.
You've been listening to the Skeptic Zone podcast. Please visit our website at www.skepticzone.tv for episodes and show notes with links going back to 2008. You can follow the Skeptic Zone on Facebook, X, TikTok and YouTube by clicking the links at our homepage, together with links to support the show financially via Patreon or PayPal. The Skeptic Zone is an independent production. The views and opinions expressed by our guests are not necessarily those of the Skeptic Zone podcast or any other skeptical organisation.
Here we are with the cassette tape of Tim, continuing our use of advanced technology. Hang on a second. Good. I've got a problem with the tape. It's come loose. Anyone got a pencil? Pencil. Lucky, get me a pencil. Yeah, any pencil. HB's fine. It doesn't matter. It's the shape I'm after. Okay, I'll just stick that in. Yeah. Right, we're good to go. Oh no, got caught in the capstan. I think I'll go back to books.
Hey everyone, this is Kate and Allie.
Coming to you from Canada.
And why are we Kate and Allie? Well, the very first time that I interviewed Kat, all the way through, I kept calling her Kate. So she had to go and get her tiara.
I did. I turned into Kate Middleton just for you.
And we received some feedback from somebody, and they called me Allie. And that's not the first time I've been called Allie. I've been called Allie lots of times in my life. I don't know, Adrian, Allie. I guess it kind of makes sense.
I've been called Kate an awful lot as well.
We decided to embrace this and call ourselves Kate and Allie, just like the old TV show.
Not that we remember TV from the 1980s. Would you like to do the first roll? Should we do predictions?
I think we need to do predictions. So we have to do, I think it's 3 rolls plus a bonus, correct?
Plus the supplemental.
Yes. We both have our origami boxes that Richard gave us, along with what sided die do you have?
Mine's a 10-sided die.
And mine is a 10-sided die. 0 to 9. So we have numbers 0 to 9 that you can roll. Okay, I'm going to put it in my box and I'm going to shake it.
Yes. But first we'll predict our numbers.
Yep.
What are your predictions?
4, 4, 0. I've never done a 0 before. Let's do 4, 4, 0. And then for the bonus, I'm going to do 6.
6. All right, Allie. Way to go. And it's really funny because I'm taking notes and I just wrote down Katie. I think I'm going to do a 5 for Susan Gerbeck.
Mm-hmm.
An 8, a 9, and a 7.
Nice.
All right, so you do first roll.
Open it up. It is a 7.
Ooh. So, all right, I'll do the second. I don't have a fancy dice roller like Mr. Saunders does. Ooh, this is a 9.
Ooh, we're not doing so good so far.
We're not so psychic after all.
No. All right. I kind of like my little box to shake it in. This is kind of fun. All right. Let's see what we got. I get a 5 for Susan.
Ooh.
Just for you, Susan.
Yay! All right. And here's for the supplemental. It's a 1.
Oh, did we get any right? We got none right, did we?
I had guessed a 5 and a 9, but not in that order. And a 7.
If it was on a lottery, it wouldn't matter. Order doesn't matter.
Right? So
there you go.
I got 3 out of 4 in lottery order, but I got 0 on actual order. Until next time,
this is Kate and Allie.